Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Boy, do I need a haircut.
Hello, I'm Marty Levinson, and welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson, and welcome to the Northtown News Magazine. We're here to cut the corruption out of the Clerk of the Circuit Court's office.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go?
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the greatest cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host, Avi Myers.
Thank you, Marty. Avi Myers, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine. Presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. Dial us up on the web at www.ntnm.org, communitypolicingcaps24.org. It's alive and well in the 24th District. It is election season, and almost every single guest you see is going to be a candidate except for this show. And we want to feature a slightly different look at the election. Guest number 2 you'll see afterwards, Jack Lahane, is the only judicial blogger who will give us an overview of judges' races. The other person is the person who actually puts the apparatus together for the voting itself. And I'd like to thank Tara Orris from his office, who was instrumental in making everything happen, and I appreciate your work very much. And also, I should say hi to my friend Michael Strom, who can't come on the air anymore because of his job with Tim Evans. But he's the one who always bugs me to get our next guest on the air. And I'm talking about the Clerk of Cook County, and do I have that title exactly right?
You got it right.
David Orr. Thank you so much for coming.
You bet, Avi.
Avi, soft day. But that's okay. Everybody gets it wrong. So how many...
Oh, that's right. I remember that now.
You're in charge of basically every polling place outside of the city of Chicago in Cook County?
Right.
And how many polling places is that?
Well, it's about 1,700 and some. We used to have a lot more than that. We've been reducing the number of precincts in the county, trying to combine precincts, partly because of the change over the last few years now, we have sometimes up to 35, maybe even more % of the people voting before Election Day. Because
many?
Yeah, because they either vote early voting, or increasingly they vote by mail, which is now legal for everybody to vote by mail.
Wow.
So that reduces the number of people on Election Day, which means our election equipment goes further. So if the precinct's a little larger, it works. And it's worked fine, and we've saved a lot of money.
Well, let me ask you, too, because in the old days with the paper ballots, I was a judge in either 80 or 84, and I think we got out at 6:30 in the morning because the judges were all on paper. So, I mean, you don't have to worry about that. You're basically putting cards through. What time does the average polling place finish up these days?
Well, it depends on the kind of election. For example, in the April election of last year, which is a local election, in the city, remember, there was only 2 candidates for mayor and maybe 11 wards and so forth. So a handful of candidates. In the suburbs, we had thousands of candidates. Because there you've got 100 and some towns that have elections for mayor, sometimes village president, trustee, and then you've got park boards and school boards and all sorts of different things. So it varies there. Increasingly, as the judges get better trained and can handle the technology, a lot of times they're able to submit electronically, the unofficial results as early as 7:20 or 7:30.
Wow.
So we're getting lots of results by 7:45. Now, on the harder part, there's sometimes where they might be in the basement of a church, it doesn't consolidate. There are times when people might be there till 9 o'clock. Now, in a presidential election, let's say in this coming November, and if there's a large turnout, which we hope for, there can be 50 people in line at 7, remember? And everybody in line at 7 gets to vote. So the judges may not finish that till 7:30, 7:45. So in that case, they'd be later.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are some places, and I know that in the city, there's like some central stations that can go for hours and hours past that point. Right. Now, what's involved in another point too, when you're talking about sending this stuff electronically, because I mean, being a poll watcher is something I happen to enjoy, to tell you the truth. And it seems to me that even though it would appear to be more difficult to cheat than the old days, because in the old days somebody could just read off the back of the machine, read it wrong, and unless somebody challenged, that was it. I can't imagine there's not a way to cheat, but it's got to be a lot harder.
It's really much harder, and we've not discovered much when it comes to actually voting day. There's still people that either mistakenly, oh, well, I've got a home in Florida and I got a home here, so why can't I vote? Or there's people sometimes that, well, I no longer live in this town, but I still work there. There are people that try that on occasion, and there's legitimate confusion. But no, it's much harder to cheat. In fact, a fairly famous politician who was an alderman, and he went to jail as a county commissioner. There was a hearing, I believe, in around 2007. It had to do with our new equipment, which we got in 2006. And he actually said publicly at this gigantic hearing, where Chairman Ed Burke was the chair, he basically, I don't like this new stuff. In the old days, all we had to do was figure out how many votes we needed. After 7 o'clock, we'd work it out. Now we can't do it. He actually said that at a public meeting. But it is much harder. You have to still be vigilant. I mean, what we're most concerned about nowadays is whether or not anyone could tamper and somehow install malicious software.
Oh,
and
that's
so
interesting.
we work at that very hard. We work with the experts. We work with the ones who are even critics. And one of the things that we do, and we're only about 2 jurisdictions in the country that do it, we have something called forensic testing. I'm talking about the suburbs now. Forensic testing means, and again, it's beyond my pay grade, but basically you take shots. When you're preparing the equipment at the warehouse, you take a shot at the ballot and the devices, the voting devices. Then you take more before the election, you take pictures, electronic pictures on election day, and you take them afterwards. The point of all that is we do believe if there was any attempt at malicious software that we would catch it. And we do all sorts of other things. Illinois law requires careful audits. And over the years, and I want to stay vigilant. I don't want to take any chances. Remember, I come from Chicago. I still live here in Chicago, and I know that there are people that would like to cheat if they could get away with it. But by doing these audits, nowadays the only problem we have is not what the machine says. The machine says it and it's right, but you and I are tallying it. I read off the name, you're doing a little check mark. That's the only problems we have, because all of a sudden, well, I got 16 and you got 14. It's just realistically, individuals, humans working on that is much more difficult than these machines.
Interesting.
So you need to be vigilant, but hopefully we have enough protections to protect ourselves in case people try to cheat.
I know what they have in Chicago, and I always try to make it a point to vote electronically. But do you have a similar setup in the suburbs? Or?
We have the same equipment, and we did that intentionally so it'd be easier for people, and someday the two offices may be combined. The difference in the city and suburbs is the city doesn't really encourage the touchscreens. Voters in Chicago and all of Cook County have the option. They can vote on the touchscreen, boom, 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 or they can vote on a paper ballot, often pretty long, and both probably in the March and November elections, there'll be 2 ballots, both sides, about this long. But, they can go through it pretty quick. So they have the choice. In the city, the vast majority of people do on paper, and they don't have as many touchscreens, and they don't make them readily available in the same way. In the suburbs, our people want the touchscreens. We tend to have 2/3 of everybody vote on them, and if we had more touchscreens, we'd probably have 80% vote on them.
Wow.
It's just, I don't know what the difference is. As people get used to it, the irony, even as the elderly people get used to it, remember, ballots are very complicated in Chicago and Cook County. We have 4 languages. And so when you go to vote, okay, and if you have the big screen, I'm older, the eyes are not so great, and you can see the big names, and you can pick the language of your choice very easily right there. And then when you go through all these names, at the end you can see, well, these are all the people you voted for, here's where you skipped. So there's a lot of protections, and even the future equipment, all future equipment will pretty much be a touchscreen. The difference in the future, and where a lot of places have gone, is to guard against any potential malicious software, et cetera. What people would do is they would have a ballot card, they'd put it into this touchscreen, do all this, and take it back out and put it in a scanner.
Interesting.
Yeah, see, right now, if you vote on paper, when you're done, you put it in a scanner, okay? And if you vote on touchscreen, you get to review what you did, but then it's all that data is in the machine. So the future, what I'm suggesting, will probably be all the value of a touchscreen. When you got lots of complicated elections, complicated ballots, and several languages, You put that card in, because that's your paper. You put it in, do all this, pull it back out, and put it in a scanner. That'll probably be the future, and most jurisdictions are heading that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the first time I ever voted was on the old machines.
The big ones, yeah.
Yeah, the big ones. And, I remember it was mayoral election, and it said, Democrat Richard J. Daley, mayor. And the next line said, Republican, danger 50,000 votes.
There's so many old stories. As people, and this is not funny because I take fraud very seriously. But over the years, since I've been around so long, when I first ran in '79, I was helped when I won for alderman as an independent way back then. And I was helped partly because there was 4 precinct captains indicted for threatening our workers way back in 1979.
Oh, I remember that.
And so, now we laugh at these stories. I mean, I think it's horrendous when people cheat, but a lot of old captains like to tell the stories about how they could fix this machine or that machine or go behind the curtain. Just 1,001 stories, and from a certain point of view, they're humorous. But in the larger thing, it's obviously what really fired me up to be county clerk, because I hate the fact of anybody here or across the country trying to cheat. And of course, nowadays we see this massive voter suppression going on around the country and other states, and it's very serious. And it's part of the reason that people increasingly are angry about the system. They don't trust the system. And even though voting is so much easier than it used to be, and we have all these new techniques to make it easy, which we could talk about if you'd like,
Sure.
but these other factors that we're spending so much money, the campaigns are too long. You have to be a millionaire to run 16 months before a presidential election or to be backed by a billionaire. And what happens in those 12, 14-month campaigns? What's the money spent on? Television ads. The vast majority are flat out nasty.
Right.
And rarely honest, rarely telling you truly about the character of the individual. My view, this has a lot to do why the American public gets cynical, and why should I vote? It's all rigged and so forth. So money in politics obviously is the most dangerous thing for the future of democracy. I'm glad the president brought that up last night. So our struggles, we can do these good things. We can train better judges. We can get better judges. The elections, knock on wood, have been pretty smooth. But we still have a problem. I use the example in 1987 when Harold Washington was running for a second term, 77.5% of the people in Chicago voted. This last April election, Rahm Emanuel versus Chuy Garcia, 42% of the people voted. So a dramatic change there. So we do all these things to make it easier, transparent. At the same time, we've got to tackle the money in politics that causes these things, which turns people off.
In Australia, they actually fine you if you don't vote.
Well, a lot of countries around the world have that law, and we tend to, oh my God, no one's going to tell me what to do. But it actually works in many cases. A lot of time it's a threat of the fine. And I sometimes like to talk about that. But it's kind of like saying, well, what's so wrong with the idea that a democracy can't survive if people don't participate in it in some way, or they give up all their authority to, and we've seen what that happens around the world, unfortunately. And so by having this, that you have to vote, even though the fines are often not collected, it does encourage participation. And we generally think, Americans, well, that's a bad way to do it. At the same time, we want people to vote.
It's so funny because I've seen, I'm old enough at this point to see people go through this cycle, because so many of the disgruntled people that don't vote are the very people that would make the system more honest and change the system into something that's more human and reasonable. And then finally, one of my best friends gets an issue. After 25 or 30 years, he actually goes and votes. Is so mad. How can people not vote? I said, I've been after you for how long? He says, but this is different because I said, you know what? There's stuff like that every year. You just don't realize it.
But there's a lot of other things we could do. For example, like I said, in a presidential election, about 70-some% of the electorate may vote. Now I shouldn't say 70-some% of the registered voters, because there's a lot of people not registered,
right,
will vote, whereas in a local election, it might be 30, 40%. So, for example, if the legislature would allow us to say on certain referenda or local elections. Skokie's going to be voting on school board and even mayor and so forth. Certain elections, if we could do them entirely by mail, and as you do in other places, and you send a ballot to every registered voter, you would increase your turnout. But in the real world of politics, which is important to explain, there's a lot of people, despite what they say publicly, do not want a big turnout. It depends. For example, you may be a school board that is convinced, rightly or wrongly, that a big turnout will hurt your referendum to raise more money. A lot of politicians, if I got elected with a 13% turnout, I'm fine with that.
I remember.
But it would really help turnout. It would be more transparency, and it could probably save us money if done properly.
Turnout does make a difference in terms of numbers. I know myself that if it snows on election day, in the old days, the regular Democratic machine was going to benefit greatly because their people were coming out come hell or high water. But the average person who wants to make a difference, but it's a little too inconvenient, and I'll get my shoes wet or.
Yep. But the good thing is, remember that of these changes that I'm actually very proud of in Illinois. I'm glad that Illinois
should be. See, it's not usual to have somebody honest in your position. It's supposed to be against the rules.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I see. Well, that's, I know when people say, you're so honest. I mean, it's sad that the impression is that others aren't, and that's really not fair. It's sad that that's the state of affairs. What I was going to say is that we've come a long way now, and for people to understand that they have these options. And because one of the battles we've fought now for 15, 20 years is, remember, we're only one of maybe two industrialized countries in the world that vote on a workday. Everybody else votes on a holiday or a Sunday.
I never thought about that.
We vote on a Tuesday, and Tuesday's a workday for most people. And so that's why we pushed early voting, and that's why we pushed everyone can vote by mail. So, because these stories, there are certain people that really want to vote. Oh my God, my daughter got sick, and I wanted to get to polls and I couldn't. Or grandmother had to go out of town at the last minute. And so now, and the more we educate people that everybody can vote early, and those numbers are rising, and that starts February 29th,
right.
February 29th, 15 days before the election, and that's becoming really popular. And then also everybody, they don't need a quote excuse, everybody can vote by mail. And technology is allowing us to make these things easier. You can now register online with your phone. And tens of thousands of people are doing it. Particularly young people that barely use a computer anymore. Boom, done. They cookcountyclerk.com, look up register online, boom, done. And there's right now, if you're thinking of voting and you want to vote by mail, you get that form, you send it in, and it all takes time, mail back and forth. You can go online, the same thing, cookcountyclerk.com or chicagoelections.com, and what you basically do is you say, okay, I want a mail ballot sent to me. It's all electronically, so it's faster.
Wow.
Because with mail voting, the only problem you've got if you wait around too long, and by the time we get you the ballot, and then all of a sudden, if you don't have it postmarked the day before the election, it's no good.
Wow. I got to get you back on real soon because I've got about 6 hours more things I want to talk about with you.
There's a lot of things to talk about, but it's exciting. People hopefully will, some of the activism of today, if it can lead toward people participating more in democracy, and if you don't like those in office, get your 2 cents there and get rid of them and put people in there you want. Otherwise, this continuing inequality in this country and the power of the few will only increase. And I'm really worried about the future of our democracy. So I'm excited about the possibilities if we take advantage of it.
I think there's reason to be, and I hate to say it, but both the left and the right scare me. And
well, some of the left and the right, they represent a dissatisfaction with the status quo.
See, that I'm fine with.
Okay.
It's a question of how you channel it.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking more in the political scene that these people want change. For example, both the right and the left, to a great extent, blame Wall Street and the banks.
Right. You look at Sanders, you look at Trump. I mean, there's a reason they're doing as well as they're doing. It's not because they're quality individuals who are the finest and brightest that this country has to offer.
I'd say one's a pretty quality individual.
Well, one's a cool guy. That I'll give you.
Well, he's been an extremely successful legislator and now U.S. Senator for a long time.
No, he also done a kibbutz in Israel for a while.
No offense to the other one, whoever you're referring to. So
the other guy, You know what? Before the guy even ran, I've got. Don't even get me started on the guy. The guy's an outright thief. I don't eminent domain. I mean, but you know what? We're out of time. I got to leave some time for Jack Leahy. He's coming here special. David Orr, clerk of Cook County. Thank you so much for being
my
here.
pleasure.
And
Thank
hope
you.
to have you back soon.
Good.